Okay. Yes, I guess we're live. I just have to see my. Maybe I should just start talking after I press start sending button, or because I'm waiting for my iPad to react, but I think it's just a little bit of delay. Anyways, hello. We're back live with our app on Code Sandbox. I thought today we could take a look at like the data structure of the app actually, and if we have time, try to grab some data. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk about something we did on the initialize, and I can just write some code here, I guess. Which is related to, I wasn't actually aware of this because we had this return new promise thing that we did, and then since we said that we're going to have like a promise here, I don't remember exactly the code, but we started to getting some type errors because I started awaiting, and the point is that we ended up with this code. Like we awaited a new promise and we returned it. And there's actually a type issue in TypeScript on this because I wasn't aware of this because I haven't really done that before. So when you return a promise from an async function, it will actually unwrap that promise. So doing like return foo and return resolve foo, that actually ends up in the same thing. Yes, but the problem is that, as I understand it, TypeScript isn't able to type inference this. And there's actually, I think it's already merged. There's like a new type called awaited, which is going to handle this. So if you like return a promise, it will properly type that. Which is interesting. And I got that tip from Bogdan, one of my colleagues at Code Sandbox. And he's typically a backend developer. So I was a little bit embarrassed that I should have known this. But yeah, I just never returned a promise from an async function before. I typically just return a value, if any. So that's the way it is. Okay. This typing thing we played around with, I have been thinking about it like a little bit, but I think the way to solve this, hopefully, is that when you do have the import type thingy, you are actually able to import the type of the Firebase namespace. But I haven't had a chance to look into this related to Code Sandbox, but we need to support that, of course. But yeah, so we'll just keep this here for now, and then we'll get back to that when we get like import type support in Code Sandbox. Cool. So if you remember, if you saw the introduction, we had this app. Let's see here, which looks something like this, which doesn't look like much currently. But if I go into next week here, you can see that we have all these different items. So the point is that every single week we go in and we click these items, and then they will kind of pop up on this thing here. And so basically the app is storing these items, and then we kind of share these items behind a family. And then we need a way to bind these items to certain weeks and certain days. So let's see. I've actually been developing this against the production database, I found out. And I think there's, because I've been developing this against my own profile. So I think some of these collections are like old, like backlog week, I think is old. Groceries is actually related to a different app that maybe we can build after this one. But anyways, what we have here is this backlog. I think the backlog still exists. So the backlog is the list of all the items. So we have like, yeah, like pick up Emma, for example, from kindergarten. So this is a backlog item that just keeps spinning. There's no specific date to it. So it's an item where you select like which day of the next week are you responsible for doing this. And then whenever we create these weeks, I can't really remember how they're created, but we'll figure that out. Let's see if we have an example here. Yeah, so it creates a week, and I think this is like the year and the week number, but then this one is a little bit weird. 2019 429. Yeah, I'm not really sure what this number means. I thought it was the week. Yeah, anyways, we'll figure that. Yeah, these might be old actually. Yeah, probably. So this was like the last week we used the app. Anyways, we'll figure that out as well. The point is that there's a specific week, and in that week we have like a days array, and then for each day we have a list of IDs which points to like a backlog item. So that is how it's able to build up the current week view where you kind of swipe through it. Cool. I hope that made some sense. I'm not sure if this data structure is the best way to do it, but it worked pretty well. Yes. So I also opened up the actual source code for the native app. I thought maybe I could talk a little bit about it, because it's written in Dart, and Dart is very similar to TypeScript actually. And also the app is organized very much like how I organize web apps. So of course, when I started writing Dart, I was trying to find like a state management library, and they had their like Redux implementations and stuff. But that was like there as well. It was insanely verbose. And they also have like a MobX implementation in Dart. But what kind of put me away from that was that they had like an additional transpilation step. So you had to run a process in the background to transpile some code, and then you had to do some imports that didn't really do anything. They were just there for the background stuff to work, and I didn't like that. What I understood later is that that was only to allow decorators, I believe. So they have like a Dart only version of MobX, which I could have used. But then I had a chance to go in and try to understand like how Dart works under the hood. What are the conventions? They use RxJS for a lot of stuff. So I implemented like a library called observable Flutter observable state or something. Yeah, it's not really Flutter specific. Yeah, it is Flutter specific because it handles rendering of widgets and stuff. So anyways, I implemented that, and the way this is organized is that we have like an API. So you can think of this as like an effect, just like our API really. And we are pretty much going to copy this concept where we have like get backlog, update backlog item, stream current week. Yeah, so they have like as I said, RxJS concept of streams. We're not going to use streams, but we're going to do something similar. Update week, delete week event, delete grocery. Weird, that shouldn't be there. Yes, and then archive backlog item. And then we have our app actions. So we are going to have some actions as well. And we're going to toggle week event. We're going to delete week event, archive. It's not that much actually. And then we have our app state, which is not too much either. It's like a backlog, the current week, next week. We have some computed, which is basically derived. And that's where kind of like the crazy logic appears. So we're going to dive into that to see if we can understand it. And like in Dart, you don't have plain objects. Well, you have plain objects, but you don't use that to model your state and stuff. You have classes. So we are not going to use these classes. We're just going to type the items coming from Firebase, because you need to have a class in Dart to be able to, like, what's it called, serialize, yeah, to understand the data that's coming from Firebase. You have to kind of make it a class instance, and that's insane stuff in Dart. It's just crazy working with JSON. It's just insane. I had an example here of how I had to like express how to convert like a Firebase response into a class, and it's just insane. You have to cast types and you have to do all sorts of crazy stuff. Yes, but it's not like as I said, it's a simple application. I guess where the complexity appears is really related to the derived stuff, how we're going to display it in the UI. Cool. Yes, and then we have the widgets and stuff. We don't have to look into that now because we're just going to focus on the data. But I guess we could try to go and grab, maybe we could try to implement this get backlog thing. That would be nice. Okay, but the first thing we have to do is, if you remember, we weren't able to log in. We got an error in Code Sandbox, and the reason we got that error is because the Firebase authentication screen, like we redirect to Firebase authentication, and that screen isn't allowed to run in an iframe, and we have the preview in an iframe here. So to actually log in, maybe we can change some code first so we can see that we're actually logged in. So we can say if state is authenticated, then we can say return whoop-de-doo. Okay. So the point here now is that to be able to log in, I can simply just open in a new window and I can do the login in here instead. And then since we're on the same domain, so when this login is done, if it works, of course, I'll have to check that. Then we are like logged in on this domain and it works in the preview again. Oh yeah, because I've already authenticated the app. So I actually think we're logged in now, if I'm not mistaken. No, we did get an error. It seems. Let's try again. So let me try to log in. It's not author. Oh, didn't I? Oh, maybe I used the wrong domain. Let's see. Dev authenticate. Oh, yeah, now I don't remember. Was it project settings? Oh, it's not here. Authentication. Yeah, sign in method. Here we are. Isn't that the domain I'm trying to reach? BHKED. Oh, Code Sandbox.io. Have we made some changes to that? That's weird. Okay, let's add that one. Cool. And we'll refresh again. And if I log in now, and it's redirecting back, it's doing the authenticating stuff. And there we are, authenticated. Sweet. Okay, let's close that one. And when we refresh here now, we should be authenticated. Oh, awesome. It worked. Great stuff. Yes, so what we want to do is, and this is where I'm a little bit unsure what we're going to do. We can try to, just to try it, we can go and grab the backlog first. But the thing is, like, do we really want, yeah, sorry, it is a stream. Firebase is real time, and typically when you work with APIs and stuff, you kind of go and grab the data once, and then you go and grab it again whenever you want to. But with Firebase, it's like live by default. So we're going to do a different strategy here. We're going to, whenever we go and grab some data, we'll have to look at the API first. But the idea is that we always update the data. We don't explicitly ask for it. We just initialize Firebase, and then whenever there's some new data, we will get that data. Now the thing is, that makes it trickier to understand, like, what's the initial loading time for the data and what happens after you get the initial data. And this has been a hard thing for me to kind of reason about with Firebase, is that when you, or generally with streaming, you just get stuff. You don't know when you get it. So it's very difficult to explain for the user what's happening. Are you like waiting for some data? Have you gotten the initial data? It kind of affects the user experience. Maybe I'm not experienced enough with streaming to handle that. But yeah, it's always been something that's not right, been quite right for me. But okay, let's try to try out this strategy where we kind of just get the backlog. And the way we can do that is use the same approach as we did with initialize. So here we passed in on auth changed. Well, we can pass in more stuff here. We can pass in an action for actually updating the backlog as well. And maybe we can create the state for that backlog first. And there's a question if we should have that backlog as, I guess we should have that as an object, like a dictionary, not an array, but a dictionary. And let's just add it here directly to the main application. So we have something called a backlog item, I guess. And what did that look like? It has a created field, a date, and a description. And now the question is, what is this created field? I don't understand why not all applications just use epoch time. There's probably a very good reason for it, but all clients understand epoch time, and it's a number, and like that number can easily be converted into local time on any client. And it's a number, like it's better to store that number in a database, and then the client decides how to represent it. Like, I don't understand why we use strings. Why do you want to store? Yeah, I guess it's because you want to store the time. You want to know on the server and in the database what's like the time zone that actually stored the time, the field, so that you kind of, so you understand from what time zone was it created. But still, I would do that like as a different field or something. I don't know. For me, it's always been really, really difficult to work with strings on time, and I prefer epoch time. Anyways, Firebase has its own concept of a timestamp. And I think we can easily convert that into epoch time if we want to. So I'm going to say number here, and we'll see what happens. And then we have like a possible date, which might be, let's do number or again, or it's null. And then we have a description, which is a string. And then what did I call it? Backlog. And this is going to be like the ID. And then we have the backlog item. So it's a dictionary of backlog items. Like that. And then we are going to, maybe we can, change out our effect a little bit first. So when we initialize now, we just pass in action as an argument, but we're going to pass in an object here instead. What should we call it? I guess we can just destructure it. Let's see. So we're going to pass in on auth changed. Did you see what I did there? So it's kind of like actions. So we get like an object of actions, but I'm like destructuring it. So we get in the on auth changed here, and now this should be complaining, which it does. And we should have some typing here, which we do. So we'll pass that in as an object instead. And I will say this one. Cool. What we're going to do, and I believe this is how Firebase works as well, we are just going to set up this this stream, like trying to grab the backlog items. But since I'm not authenticated, I won't get anything. But as soon as I'm authenticated, that stream will kind of like change, and I will start getting my items, I think. So let's try that. Firebase Firestore JS. I don't remember the API for this. Cloud Firestore. Get started. Read data. Get data once. Listen for real time. Yeah, okay, let's read this stuff first. Okay, so here we are getting on snapshot. The question is, do we get the initial stuff as well? You can listen to a document with on snapshot. An initial call using callback you provide creates a document snapshot immediately with the current contents of the single document. Sweet, that's exactly what we want. But we want, yes. Okay. DB, what's DB? Is that how do we get D? I guess we do firebase.database. That doesn't look right. So thank you for this example. That was very, well, I shouldn't complain. Like, I know how hard it is to write documentation. It's insane. This is such a good example. Like, they probably wrote these docs as like, okay, you go through these steps, and they didn't kind of think about that you might dive into each section and what context do you need to understand, for example, this example in isolation. And of course, to understand it, I would need to know what the hell does DB point to? How do I get the DB? But this is the tricky thing about writing documentation. You never know the context of the consumer of the documentation. And it's incredibly hard to reason about all the possible contexts. And then also the documentation becomes quite bloated if every single piece of documentation needs to contain all the information you need for any kind of context to read that documentation. Yeah, or to get value out of that documentation, I mean. But maybe we'll get some information here. DB, oh, Firestore. Why didn't they call it Firestore? Firestore. What was it? Collection. Yeah, so we have, let's look at the source code. Get data. Oh, yeah, I have this core API. So I was going to make this family of apps where I have like this core app that holds logic for syncing and stuff. And basically, yeah, I think we're missing some stuff here. We need to find information about the family. Like in the database, you can see up here we have families. And how do I know which family you're part of? I can't remember. It must be, let's see, core actions. Oh yeah, yeah, of course, you also have a profile. So that's a different, yeah, now I'm starting to remember. We first have to go and grab the profile, and the profile contains information about your family UID. And then we use that family UID to go and grab the actual backlog items. So, okay, we have to first, yeah, exactly. And we have the profile, set initial state. Where is this being used? Final references. Well, that took forever. There we are. Yeah, we're getting the yeah, here we are. Get profile. Okay. Yes, and this makes things a little bit more tricky because now we have, and this is what I mean about, oh, this is such a good example. And this is what I mean about the trickiness of Firebase, because now we have this general on-auth state changed, which is nice. Like we control when we log in and when we log out, but then we kind of, when we log in, we want to go and grab the profile, for example. So it's not like these different triggers coming from Firebase, they're not like isolated. You want to tie them together to run some logic. So what we basically want to do now is we want to, yeah, we can't actually do this here. Because what we want is that when you're actually authenticated, that is when we want to go and grab the profile, and then we want to set up the listener for the collection, because then we actually have the IDs we need. So all this stuff was actually completely unnecessary. Let's see. We can still just do this like that, on initialize. Yep. Okay, so we're back to where we started, and then rather in our action that handles on auth changed, this is where we get the user. And this is where we need to go and start grabbing the profile and set up the listener for our backlog. Now the question is, how should we do that? Like the profile, we don't, like it won't have any changes really. We could set up like a listener system for that as well, but I think we're just going to grab it whenever we authenticate. And then we need to set up a listener for the backlog. And the question is, should we kind of put this behind like a state machine and stuff? I guess we could do that, because then we could even try to mess around with the exit of the state machine, which is interesting. Yeah, let's try that. I'm not sure if we'll get to actually grabbing the items yet, but we have done some preparation here at least. So the idea, we can go through the idea first. So whenever we have our user here. So now we have information to go and grab the profile. Go grab the profile. And this will be like just, we have our effects here. So we can say like effects API get profile, for example. And we just give it the user. Yes. And maybe that needs to be its own authentication state, maybe. Yeah, we'll have to think about that. But anyways, we'll go and grab the profile. And then when we have the profile, we are able to go and listen to changes to the backlog. And what's interesting about that is that we can set up like, let's see, profile, get profile, and then we can do like dispose, and then we say effects API stream backlog. I'm not sure what we're going to call it. And then we give it a profile. And what we can actually do here is that we can say let dispose backlog, and then we can say dispose backlog here. And then what's interesting about this is that you can give a second callback to the transition into a state on the state machine, and then that second callback will be called whenever it exits that authenticated state. So what we can do is that we can actually dispose our backlog when the authenticated state exits, which is kind of interesting. Like, I guess Firebase handles this by itself because you're not authenticated, so you won't get any more items, but it's nice to see how that works. Cool. yes, string backlog. I guess we want to give it a profile, and then like we want to say actions on backlog or something. On backlog update. Or maybe, yeah, on backlog update. I don't want to make the concept of snapshots leak into the application logic, because snapshots is Firebase specific. Like the app doesn't care about snapshots. It only cares about the backlog items. So that is why I'm calling it on backlog update instead of on backlog snapshot, for example. Okay, cool. I think we have like a plan here. So we want to, the only thing we have to decide on is getting this profile. Is that something that we should do as part of the authenticating? I guess we should do that. So if we have a user, we are actually going to grab the profile first, which actually makes this an async action. We're going to grab the profile first, and then when we have the profile, that is when we're actually authenticated. And we can go and set up our listeners to the backlog updates. Now, the thing is that, the cool thing is that while we're grabbing the profile, something might happen because it's async. Maybe you're logging out or something, which means that when it then tries to go into the authenticated state, it won't be able to do that because you're now like unauthenticated again. So if we look at our state machine, just to explain that. So you can't go from authenticated to authenticated. No, sorry, you can't go from unauthenticated to authenticated. As you can see here, if I explain that again, if for some reason we get logged out when we're grabbing the profile and we're trying to go into the authenticated, we aren't able to do that. We have to move into authenticating first, which means that if that happens, we protect that. We are guarding our logic. We won't set the user, and we won't go and set up our listener for the backlogs, because it does require you to be in the state machine needs to be in a state where we are allowed to transition into the authenticated state. I feel that like these state machines, like generally, not specific to Ormine, is really powerful, but they are difficult to talk about. Maybe I'm missing some vocabulary to talk about it more eloquently, but hopefully it makes sense. And especially after we actually implement this stuff, it should make a lot more sense. And some of it might seem like, yeah, but you were just authenticated. You got a user there. What's the chances of while you go and get the profile that you're unauthenticated again? Like, how could that happen? And it's a good question. It will probably never happen, but technically it could happen. And that's exactly why state machines are powerful. We take so many shortcuts as developers with async code. At least that's my experience. Like we don't take into consideration all the stuff that can happen while we're doing something async. Especially when you have this long list of logic and you're doing maybe 2-3 different async stuff, and they all need to happen in the same context, but that context might suddenly change while you're doing these async things. So after every async thing, you should really check, am I still in the same context? And then continue the logic. And of course, bugs do happen this way, but how often do they happen? Well, it depends, of course. And then there's the question of how easy is it to understand that it happened? And the more complexity you have in that async logic, the more difficult it will be to debug it. Like Code Sandbox has a lot of this logic, and we are not good at like identifying that we're still in the same context when we're doing all this async stuff. And it's been difficult to debug some of that stuff. But that's just because CodeSandbox is like, it's building up feature on top of feature on top of feature. And then you kind of get into those situations sometimes. Yeah, cool. I guess that's it for now. I hope we were able to actually grab some data. But yeah, I forgot we need the profile first. But at least we've talked about it, and we have a plan that we can execute on tomorrow. And we should be able to get the profile and even get like the initial backlog. And that's nice. Then we're on our way. Sweet. I guess that's it. I hope this wasn't too boring this time. There was a lot of looking at code and talking, not too much coding. But yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, and then it will definitely be a lot of coding. Okay, bye-bye. Oh, that was the wrong one.